Good morning and welcome to the Lansing Regional Chamber of Commerce New Districts presentation. We're excited to have Gongwer News Service Executive Editor and Publisher Zach Gorchow with us this morning. Zach's going to go through and break down all the new districts that are important to our region. So we're going to spend some time looking at the new congressional seats as well as the state Senate and state House. We may at a later date go through some of the county commissions, but for this discussion and with Zach's expertise, we're going to keep focused on the congressional, state Senate, and state House races. So before that, when Zach is going through his presentation, as a reminder, everybody, it has probably been a while for some of us, but this is a webinar format. When all of you that have entered the room, you're on mute. We will not be able to see your video. During Zach's presentation, please feel free. Zach is very good on going through all of this and being able to answer questions throughout his presentation. He's done this a few times for our chamber. But if you do have any questions during the presentation, please raise your hand or ask to speak in the chat box, or provide your question in the chat box. I'll be playing operator today, and I'll do my best to answer everybody's questions. With that, I'm just going to introduce Zach. Zach was named Gongwer's executive editor and publisher in 2020 and manages the company's Michigan operations, develops new services, plays a role in news coverage, and leads reporting on the governor's office. He was Gongwer's editor from 2009 to 2019. Mr. Gorchow also covered the Michigan House Representatives for Gongwer from 1998 to 2005. In between his two Gongwer stints, he spent 4 years at the Detroit Free Press covering Wayne County and the city of Detroit. Prior to first working at Gongwer, he reported for the Observer newspapers in suburban Wayne County. He's a Troy native. Now he lives in East Lansing, of course, and we're happy with that. And an international relations graduate from Michigan State University, where he worked on the school student newspaper, the State News. In 2015, he made the Washington Post list of the best state political reporters in the United States. And I'll give you his direct line later, but heck of a bio. But Zach, it's great to have you with us this Monday, April 25th. Filing deadline was last week, and we're kind of in the next phase of this election, 2022. So it's great to have you today. I'll share the screen, and we can get going.
Thanks a lot for that great introduction, Steve. And it's great to be with you this morning. You know, the filing deadline to file for the August primary, which was 4 p.m. last Tuesday, is really the real kickoff to the election year. Always so much speculation about who's going to run for what, who's not going to seek re-election. Finally, we got all our answers last week, and it's kicking off a really exciting election year because, of course, we have these new districts, which have been drawn really unlike any districts we've had in memory. And so I think everybody is intrigued and excited to see what, the impact of those districts are. And there was a real effort to try to make Michigan's districts relatively even between the political parties, which could make for, maybe some more dramatic races. I think certainly we're going to have more competitive races than we've had recently as a result of these maps. So I think we're going to kick it off with the congressional districts. And of course, the big one, in many ways, the only one, but really the big one for our region is this 7th district race, which puts Alyssa Slotkin, the incumbent, against likely Tom Barrett, the Republican state senator from the region. However, as filing day sometimes produces, there was a little bit of a surprise. A person that I don't think many people are familiar with, named Jack Hagg, filed. My suspicion is this will be what we might term more of a nuisance primary for Tom Barrett. I don't expect it's going to pose any kind of a serious threat to him being the nominee, but it will require him to make sure he's messaging to Republican voters in advance of the August 2nd primary, and make sure that his folks get out. But given the nature of this district, given that almost Tom Barrett's nearly his entire district is within the 7th congressional district. I should say nearly his entire state Senate district is within the congressional district. I'd be shocked if he got anywhere less than 70 to 75% in this primary, and so I don't expect that to be much of an event. The Slotkin-Barrett race, however, is going to be one of the most prominent races nationally. At least that's what I expect at this point. This is a district that is about a 50-50 district between the political parties, maybe even slightly on paper a little more Republican than Democratic. And of course, it's changed a lot. Alyssa Slotkin currently represents Ingham, Livingston, and Northern Oakland County. Northern Oakland County was actually the population base of the district, even though I think most of us around here kind of think of it as the Lansing area district. It was still a pretty Detroit area heavy district. Not anymore. There was a real push to create a capital region district. That's what happened. And now you've got Clinton, Shiawassee, most of Eaton coming in, and you get rid of Northern Oakland. You still keep a little piece of Southwest Oakland. I'm not sure why the commission, did that the way it did, but that's how it is. But this is clearly a capital region district. And the question will be, can Alyssa Slotkin hang on in what looks like a pretty tough environment for Democrats? She's always been able to run ahead of her district. I believe, she won her current seat, even though it was a Trump district. In 2018, she did have a little more wind at her back with, Governor Whitmer going away, but it was a district that Trump won in 2016 as well. So she's going to probably have to overcome, again, what the national environment is to win. You've got Tom Barrett coming in, really the ideal candidate for the Republicans in this district. As I said, almost his entire Senate district is within the district. He's got a background that's very easy to use in a campaign with his military background. He's run and won several tough races, 2014 and 2016 for the state house. And then his 2018 race that shouldn't have been very difficult because his Senate district was strongly Republican, but the late Kelly Rosser McKinney ended up making a very interesting race of that. She was able to put a lot of money into that race. He ended up still winning relatively comfortably, but he had to work for it very hard, and a lot of money was spent for him. So he's had, both Slotkin and Barrett have had a ton of money spent on their behalf in the Lansing media market. I think they're probably about as well known as you could get for a politician in this area. So I expect this to be a nationally prominent race. We're going to probably have national surrogates coming in to campaign for both. An unbelievable amount of money will be spent. Now, Alyssa Slotkin has an enormous fundraising advantage over Senator Barrett right now in the many millions of dollars in terms of what she has in the bank versus what he has in the bank. That will afford her some advantages because she'll be able to do a lot of direct advertising, saying vote for Alyssa Slotkin, reelect Alyssa Slotkin. Barrett is going to have to rely a lot more on outside groups, the National Republican Congressional Committee, and that's fine. I don't. At the end of the day, I expect millions and millions of dollars are going to be spent for both candidates. And while Slotkin has a really big one-on-one candidate-to-candidate advantage, I would be really surprised if there isn't an avalanche of money spent by outside groups to help Barrett and even that up so that his message gets out there. I think this is a coin flip race. I don't, it's hard to see right now, make any kind of prediction as to who's going to win. And the one unknown here is Governor Whitmer and the governor's race. This is, of course, her home turf. She was very strong in this region in 2018. Even in Livingston County, which she lost, as it's a strongly Republican area, she ran much better than your typical Democrat in that year. But that was a midterm with a Republican in the White House. This is going to be a midterm with a Democrat in the White House. That plays to the Republicans' advantage. That said, though, if Governor Whitmer can run better than a garden variety Democrat in this region, that will provide some help to Slotkin. So I think everybody get ready, your TVs, your internet feeds, your mailboxes are going to be slammed with this one. Steve, anything you want to ask on that?
Yeah, so Zach, on District 7 with the Slotkin Barrett race, how much, I mean, a lot of it will be national, like you just were talking about, but when we come back and think of, pretty large, enormous vote that was taking place back, I believe in December, that dealt with a lot of economic incentive, kind of retooling the state's way on how they expand businesses. And then, of course, the General Motors announcement of the new electric vehicle plant that's going in Delta Township. Obviously, from the chamber, we were very supportive of that. How is that going to play in this race with Senator Barrett voting no on that legislation? Of course, I'm sure Congresswoman Slotkin was very happy that he voted no, but how is that going to play on kind of this national race, but getting all the way down here locally?
Well, the Slotkin people and Congresswoman Slotkin are already hammering that. As Tom Barrett voted against jobs, essentially, is what the message is. I think I've seen a billboard on 496 for it, or at least I did at some point. And we, in the media are getting a number of press statements from the Slotkin campaign reminding us Tom Barrett voted no. I expect this is going to be heavily emphasized by the Slotkin campaign. Senator Barrett is working to counter that by saying this was quote unquote crony capitalism. That essentially the state of Michigan, what was it, something like 600 to 700 million dollars in taxpayer money was used to benefit one company and convince them to continue to bolster their footprint with electric vehicles in the Lansing region. And so there, it's sort of in some ways an old-fashioned philosophical debate there, instead of some of the red meat kind of stuff we see these days, where it's going to be a debate about what is the role of government, talking about the role of government in the economy. So I think in some ways it's refreshing from some of the culture war instead of some of the culture war stuff we get. But I think it's going to be a very significant point that's going to be argued. I'm sure from the Slotkin standpoint, they want that to be the emphasis. Tom Barrett is going to be pushing, you need to send a message to Joe Biden. Joe Biden cannot continue to have a Democratic-led Congress. Send me to be a check on Joe Biden. I'm going to work to cut inflation. That's going to be his message over and over and over again. And he'll be tying Congresswoman Slotkin to President Biden repeatedly.
Yes, thank you for that. We did get a question in one of the chat boxes here, and it has to do with District 2. And it just asked about, please clarify what cities are slivered out of Eden County that fall into the 2nd district and maybe why. And when I was looking this up, Zach, while you're answering that question, it looks like, of course, kind of the west side of Eden County, but it's like Sunfield. I think that's Sunfield Township, Vermontville. Yeah. But if you could answer that, I guess the why of what the redistricting commission was thinking here.
Yeah, thank you for helping out on the geography there. I was going to say, I think Sunfield's over there, but I was a little nervous I didn't want to take a guess, so I appreciate that. I don't know, if it were me, and I don't know how the population, probably the population doesn't match up, but it's a little surprising to me that they included that southwest chunk of Oakland County, which would be kind of like the South Lyon area, if people are familiar with that, and to slice out that part of Eaton County. But when you're drawing these maps, it's like putting together a puzzle. And so they probably, as they were figuring out how they were going to slice and dice Oakland County, they had that left over and it needed to go somewhere. And it ended up in the Capital District. And because particularly with the congressional districts, the population has to be almost exact. I think these districts are roughly within a couple hundred people of each other. You don't have a lot of wiggle room. So unlike the state legislature districts, which we'll look at in a little bit, you can, I think, have a variance of something like 5 to 10% in the population. So you can, you don't have to have as squiggly looking borders, but with the congressional seats you do. And that's my best guess. I can't get in the heads of the redistricting commission on that particular piece.
Oh, thank you. Clearly that person probably lives in Sunfield. Actually, I know, I think
Right.
he does. Or
While we're on that, you can barely see it, but there's like the tiniest, like one precinct of Genesee County is in this district too. I have no idea why that's over there, but again, just some of you can't figure out why they did some of the things the way they did.
So in District 2, most likely Congressman John Molnar will win that one. That's pretty.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a Republican primary opponent. I mean, first, let's start out with this. It's a solidly Republican district. There's just very little area over there that you would say that's Democratic turf. Like probably the city of Mount Pleasant would be your one, and maybe the city of Manistee would be the two little areas you would say those are Democratic areas. Pretty much everything else solidly Republican. So this is one where the Republican is going to win in November. Now he does have a primary challenger in Tom Norton. I mentioned culture war issues. Tom Norton's all about culture war issues, but John Molnar has former President Trump's endorsement. Tom Norton has no real resources to get a message out. And I would be surprised if Congressman Molnar finished under 70%, in the primary. I would imagine he wins that going away, but it is, it is the kind of thing that forces him to make sure he's taking care of business in the primary. He can't take it for granted. But he is the heavy favorite to be renominated.
So clearly, at least, and I know we're talking about the Greater Lansing region in these districts, but District 7, not only probably one of the top races in the state, but the nation as it pertains to the majority in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Absolutely.
Are there any other, again, we're focused on our region here, but any other races that you may want to pick out on the U.S. House side that may be interest to our group here?
Sure. I mean, I think, it's not really Lansing region, but I think just from a standpoint of what you mentioned about control of Congress, Michigan's really unique because we did have this independent commission that really focused on drawing districts that would be competitive. And so between the Slotkin Barrett race, then you're going to have this race over in, it's the 3rd district. So if you think about basically Grand Rapids to Muskegon, and then over in that kind of Flint plus the Tri-Cities area going up the 75 corridor, Midland, Bay City, Saginaw, where Congressman Kildee is the incumbent, you're looking at 3 barn burner kinds of races just in Michigan. And from what I've read nationally, the total number of those kinds of races nationally is like less than 20. So it really is going to put a big emphasis on these 3 races in Michigan and Michigan in general in terms of figuring, who's going to control the U.S. House next term. So, for people who maybe live on the outskirts, if maybe you work in the Lansing region, but you live in the Grand Rapids media market, you're going to see a ton of media on, what happens in that Grand Rapids. This is the Peter Meyer Congressional District. He's got to get through a potentially tough primary, and then you got Hillary Skolton for the Democrats, should be a strong candidate. Or if you live out on the northeast outskirts of the Lansing region and you get Flint, Saginaw media, you're going to be seeing a ton there in that, whoever ends up matching up against Dan Kildee.
Yeah, well, no, thank you for that, and we'll move on to the state senate. We do have, and we're really excited about this. Next week we'll have Congresswoman Slotkin and Congressman Peter Meyer over at the Crown Plaza. So kind of an official kind of update from Washington, but having both of those two to talk with our business members here in the region. So it should be interesting, especially after hearing going through District 7 and then a little bit of Congressman Meyer there talking about that seat. But we'll move on to the state Senate.
So the state Senate, I think probably let's start with the easiest one here. So this is District 21. State Representative Sarah Anthony is basically going to walk into this district with almost no resistance or difficulty. So, one of the things the commission did was to, again, trying to create more competitive districts. So in the past, the way the Lansing region was handled was that most of Ingham County ended up in one district, and then what was left was parceled out somewhere else. So if you think about it right now, Northeast Ingham County is part of the Tom Barrett district with Shiawassee, Clinton, and Eaton counties. And the rest of Ingham County is represented by Senator Curtis Hertel Jr. So what the commission did, though, was say, you know what, we're not going to have just this really heavy Democratic district like Senator Hertel has now. We're going to divide up that Democratic vote into two different districts to create more competition. So they took the city of Lansing and put most, but not all of it, into this 21st district. And it's still, though, while it's not an overwhelmingly Democratic district, it is a pretty likely Democratic district. It's what prompted Tom Barrett not to run for re-election. He lives in that district. It is too Democratic for him to win. And it got, that's what got him looking at running for Congress. Everyone in the region was expecting a Sarah Anthony, Sam Singh primary for that kind of Ingham County heavy seat to see who would be the next senator for that district. And instead, the commission split East Lansing, where Sam Singh lives, the very east side of Lansing, Meridian Township, Williamstown Township, I think Locke, maybe another township, and joined it with most of Clinton and Shiawassee counties. So Sarah Anthony has no opposition for the Democratic nomination. It's a pretty likely Democratic district. She's going to be the next senator I guess we should say the first senator for this 21st district, and she's going to be on her way. That's what every candidate kind of dreams of, that they don't have to face a really challenging, difficult campaign. So that one's pretty easy to just mark up as Sarah Anthony is going to be in the Senate next year. More interesting is this new 28th district. This is where Sam Singh ended up being drawn into. This is what I would describe a tilting Democratic district, but it is not in the bag, especially this year where it should be a good Republican environment. Now, Sam Singh does have what I would describe as a nominal Democratic primary challenger. Mohammed Reyes was a candidate for the state house in a Clinton County district. I just don't see him having anywhere near the resources or the sophistication in terms of his campaign to compete with a Sam Singh who is going to roll in the Democratic primary. And this is a Democratic primary that will be controlled by East Lansing, Meridian Township, and that little piece of Lansing, that's where the votes are, and that's what Sam Singh is represented. He's going to be strong there. He'll be the Democratic nominee. The Republican side is interesting. I think if, in an ideal world, the Republicans would have been able to get either State Representative Ben Frederick, who represents Shiawassee County right now and is term limited, or State Representative Graham Filler, who represents Clinton and Gratiot counties right now. They decided to take a pass. Graham Filler is running for re-election in a slightly different district, and Ben Frederick is not going to be on the ballot this year. So without those two, they were left looking for new faces and new candidates, and they were excited to recruit a guy named Dalen Howard, a manager at a jewelry store who lives in Shiawassee County, I believe, into the race, and that was who was expected to be the Republican nominee. However, we talk about filing day surprises, and a big filing day surprise was that Madhu Anderson, who does government relations for the Nature Conservancy currently, a longtime well-known person in the Lansing region. She was kind of a top official in both the Snyder and Engler administrations. She's married to Pat Anderson, who runs Anderson Consulting Group. as she's been around for a while and ran for the state house actually in 2018, but did not do very well. Finished way back of Graham Filler in the Republican primary in 2018 for a state house seat. So she gets into the race kind of out of nowhere. So it could be interesting. Obviously Dalen Howard's a new candidate, has not run for anything ever before. Now all of a sudden he's got to run against somebody who is experienced in politics, has run a race before, didn't do particularly well, but should be able to, I would expect Anderson to be able to put together a credible campaign. And now Dalen Howard, who was recruited into the race by Senate Republicans, he's going to have to be, having to raise the money on his own to get nominated. The Senate caucus can't really help him in the primary. So I'm not sure what to expect in that primary. I do think that the general election race has the potential to be interesting. I know the Senate Republicans think if this year is as good as they think it could be, that they have a shot at a seat like this. If turnout is down in East Lansing and Meridian Township, and they can really get Republican turnout juiced in the conservative areas of Shiawassee and Clinton County, maybe this gets interesting. I still think, Sam Singh is going to be the favorite at the end of the day. It also helps to have, Governor Whitmer leading the ballot, being her home turf. That can't hurt either. So I think it's, one where we have classified as the race as tilting Democratic. I think we're probably going to keep it there for a little while until we can see, who ends up coming out of the Republican primary and what does the environment end up looking like. If the Republican candidate for governor, whoever that ends up being, of the 10 people who have filed, if they can't mount a strong campaign, if it looks like the governor's race gets away from the Republicans and Governor Whitmer is going to win it, that, I think puts a lot of doubt on Republicans' ability to win a district like this. But if it ends up being a real dogfight for governor, then this is a seat where it could get interesting. You want me to stop there for a second, Steve, or you want me to move on over to 22 and Livingston County?
Yeah, if you want to, no, that was very helpful to go through 21, 28. But yeah, if you want to talk a little bit, and again, for everybody on that are joining us today, is when we're looking at all these, of course, it's, the Greater Lansing region. We'll probably talk a little bit more on the state house districts because there's a lot more there. But, we work at the chamber with our Capital Caucus members. So those members that are from the state Senate, state house representatives, the Capital Caucus, who represent our capital region. And when we're looking at this and working with the Capital Caucus members right now, and I think this will be up for debate within that caucus on the state house side, but we're looking at with these new districts, are there going to be new districts that are going to be joining the Capital Caucus? So that's where Zach's going to kind of run through this District 34 as well as this District 22, since they have a few different, again, as we can see from the redistricting commission, they've kind of cut up a little bit of Ingham County as well as Clinton County for that District 34 and then District 22. So thanks, Zach.
So thanks, Steve. The District 22 is really a Livingston County based district. Again, the redistricting commission paying less attention to county and municipal boundaries in the past. You can see the parts of 5 counties in this: part of Ingham, Shiawassee, Genesee, and even the tiniest corner of Oakland is in there. But by and large, this is a seat where Livingston County is going to call the shots. That's where most of the votes are. This is where Senator Lana Tice is the incumbent. She has been in the news a lot in the last week. She went after and attacked Democratic state senator from Oakland County named Mallory McMorrow. I'm not going to rehash a lot of the details there. You may have heard about some of this, but it was a very personal, pretty vicious attack. It ended up creating a financial windfall for Senator McMorrow. She raised basically 4 years worth of campaign cash in 48 hours. And Senator McMorrow's speech denouncing what Senator Tice said about her has been viewed something like 14 million times on Twitter. So I mention this because Senator Tice has really positioned herself at the heart of these culture war kinds of issues. Things like LGBTQ, critical race theory, a lot of these kinds of flashpoint issues that you see Republicans and the kind of hardcore Trump voters gravitating toward. That's become Senator Tice's stock in trade. And what happened last week was an example of that. However, even though I think most people would say you can't get to the right of Senator Tice, she's as conservative as it gets, she has a notable primary challenger in Mike Detmer, who is endorsed by former President Trump. And you might say, well, wait a minute, Senator Tice is embracing all the things that former President Trump is in favor of, and you would be correct, except for one thing, which is the idea that there was fraud in the 2020 election that decided it. Of course, I think everyone knows President Trump continues to claim without any real evidence that fraud decided the 2020 election and caused now President Biden to win. Senator Tice sits on the Senate Oversight Committee. That's the committee headed by Chair Senator McBroom that put out a very thorough, detailed report, really authoritatively rebutting and refuting the idea that fraud or anything untoward decided the 2020 presidential election in Michigan. And Senator Tice was a signatory to that report. So that prompted a number of county Republican parties around the state to censure her. Really doesn't have any meaningful impact on anything, but it really, this is something that has raised the ire of hardcore Trump voters and Republican voters around the state. And thus, Trump has endorsed Mike Detmer. And this to me is a great test case, because if Senator Tice can't win a Republican primary, it really says that this election issue is the end all be all for Republican voters in the state now, because there's no other daylight between her and Mike Detmer on any other issue other than the 2020 election. So we'll see what happens. Senate Republicans have promised an aggressive defense of Senator Tice and the other senator or two incumbent who are facing these Trump endorsed challengers. They're going to go to the mat to make sure their incumbents get renominated at the August primary. And we'll see what happens. I'm certain that Mike Detmer is going to be way outspent. We don't even, the Trump endorsement, will there be money behind that? We'll see. I'm confident there's going to be a lot of money put into getting Tice through the primary from the Senate Republicans. So a really interesting test case there. The District 34, which kind of goes into the central part of the state, is kind of anchored in Isabella, Clare counties. Representative Roger Houck represents Isabella County and Western Midland County now. He's not going to have the same coasting into it that Representative Anthony has to her seat, but it's pretty close. He did get a primary challenger kind of at the last second, and Lisa Sowers. I tried looking up information on her, couldn't find anything about her. This happens in elections. People just decide, hey, it'd be fun to have my name on the ballot. I'm interested to run it. Oh, I just have to plunk down $100 to get on the ballot for the legislature, and they end up running. This doesn't really happen with Congress, because you have to file a minimum of 1,000 valid petition signatures for registered voters to get on the primary ballot. So you can't just willy-nilly show up at the last second and file for Congress, but you can for the legislature. And I'd be surprised if this was anything that forces, puts any pressure on Representative Houck, but it does mean he will have to make sure he's running a good, a campaign, can't take anything for granted. But it is a solidly Republican district, so I would suspect that after he comes out of the primary, he'll, walk to a really easy victory in the general election. Other than the city of Mount Pleasant, there just aren't really very many pockets of Democratic strength in that seat.
So overall, when we look at the state senate, and hopefully no one on this joining us today is from the Upper Peninsula, since I failed to add the Upper Peninsula here. We were talking about our region down here in Lansing. But state senate majority, right now Republican majority, for quite some time, probably, I don't know what, 35, 40 years.
Yeah, since 1984.
Yeah, so 1984. What does that look like this fall for the Senate majority Republicans to retain that?
Well, I mean, this is, I think, the most, probably the best shot the Democrats have had since 2006. So that was the George W. Bush, his second midterm. It was a huge national Democratic wave. Jennifer Granholm, Governor Granholm, when she won re-election over Dick DeVos, huge. And that year, Democrats came within a few hundred votes in 2 districts from taking the Senate. They didn't get there. Other than 2006, they have not come close to majority since 1984. But the way these maps have been drawn, we talked a little bit about sort of unpacking Democratic voters in the Lansing area. That's been done all around the state. So if you think about, that was done in Grand Rapids, that was done in Ann Arbor, that's been done in I'm blanking on the other, in Oakland County. It's been done in a number of regions. So as a result, you have a lot more competitive districts than you have under the current map. You've had areas where they've tried to carve out where you can create a competitive district where none exists. So they created a district with Midland, Saginaw, and Bay City. That's a 50-50 district. They've done some interesting things in Macomb County where they've linked parts of Detroit going north all the way to Macomb Township. Really unusually drawn seat from a visual standpoint, but not from a partisan standpoint, because they've created a lot of competitive districts where none currently exist. So I think right now it's up for grabs. If this does end up being a really good Republican year, Republicans are going to keep the majority. It probably won't be that close from a seats standpoint. Governor Whitmer needs to win re-election probably by at least 4 to 5 points to give the Democrats a shot at winning Senate control. The thing you got to give the Senate Democrats a lot of credit is they, in pretty much every potential competitive seat, they've come up with a credible to strong candidate. This has been a big problem for them in the past, where there have been seats that look competitive on paper and they completely whiff on the candidate recruitment side. But this time around, even in districts, this is a little far flung, but if you look up the Lakeshore going from Muskegon County going north, on paper, it's about a 50-50 district. In practice, it probably tilts a little Republican, but they've got it, and Dems have an incumbent state rep there to go up against the incumbent state senator in that area. So you've got stories like that all around the state. And I think it's going to be fascinating. A lot of competitive seats. And I think, the Democrats certainly feel like there's a roadmap to majority for them. That hasn't been the case really since 2006. You've not been able to credibly draw up a scenario where the Democrats get to 19 seats if they have the governorship. You have the governorship, the lieutenant governor breaks the tie. So that means a 19-19 tie with a Governor Whitmer reelection as a Democratic majority in the Senate, or 20 seats for an outright majority. That just roadmap hasn't been there, and there is one now. But that said, there's certainly a very good roadmap for the Republicans to maintain their majority. And it really is going to come down to, I think, the big seats to watch are that Midland, Saginaw, Bay City seat. I mentioned that Macomb seat that's kind of unusual. That's another one to definitely watch. So, you've got a few like that around that are going to decide this thing.
Thank you, Zach. So we do have another question in the
Great.
chat box. And for those that are on, please utilize that chat box if you do have questions for Zach. This question, I believe this is the first bipartisan committee to do redistricting. Or am I wrong? Please comment on the redistricting efforts in general. It sounds like that you may be suggesting it may have been slightly in favor of Democrats.
Great question. So yes, this was the first time Michigan has had this independent commission drawing the maps. It was passed by voters as a constitutional amendment in 2018. And it was the way it was designed with the language was to come up with the most balanced map possible, really, from a partisan standpoint. They had to make sure equal population was number one, compliance with the Voting Rights Act was number two, partisan fairness was number three. In the last two, it's always been, not always, in the last two rounds of redistricting, 2001 and 2011, the legislature with its Republican majority drew the maps, and then a Republican governor signed it, so those favored the Republicans. Prior to that, in the previous two before that, it was handled by the Michigan Supreme Court. And tended to be maybe favor Republicans just ever so slightly, but we're relatively even. So I know I've talked a lot about this gives the Democrats a chance, these are Democratic seats and so forth. But this was not a map that in neither case for the state Senate nor the state House nor Congress would you say that these maps, quote unquote, favor Democrats. I would say they're all in all, they're level. And in the state House map actually probably slightly favors Republicans even. We'll talk a little bit more about that one in a minute. But if you look at the Senate map, you've got roughly, and these are going to be 38 total seats, you've got roughly 10 to 15 seats, let's just say 13 each that are solidly Democratic, solidly Republican. Then you've got another handful that are likely to be Democratic or likely to be Republican, but in an extreme circumstance could go the other way. Then you have another 3 or 4 that I would describe as tilting Democratic or tilting Republican, which would be competitive. Either side could win, but there's a favorite on either side. And then you have your toss-up seats where there's about 3. So hopefully what you've seen there is it's very much a kind of an even pyramid going up, where you've got, start out as a base of 13 or so solidly Dem Republican, and then narrower and narrower as you get to the toss-up, where you've got 3 pure toss-ups and I think maybe 3 or 4 tilting seats on either side. So overall, I think commission, you could criticize some aspects of it that maybe it was a little chaotic. People may not like that municipal and county boundaries were in some ways ignored or blown up relative to the past. But I think if you were grading them and you were to say, how did they do on the partisan fairness standpoint, you'd give them a pretty good grade. Now, I said I know the League of Women Voters and some groups that tend Democratic did attempt to sue the commission and say the maps were still too far to the Republican side. Michigan Supreme Court dismissed that case, said no, they weren't. But I know the Senate Republicans are a little sore about how the Senate map was drawn. They felt like this, again, municipal county boundaries were really ignored for the partisan fairness, partisan standpoint. But again, the constitutional language put partisan fairness above maintaining municipal lines. Again, I would say in general, I think these maps are pretty even. Who knows if this ends up being a Republican tsunami this year, Republicans end up keeping majorities in both chambers by healthy margins. I'm sure the Republicans will be chortling at the Democrats saying, yeah, you got your commission finally, and look what happened. We still got majority. So we'll see what happens.
No, thank you. Good question. Thank you, Zach, for the response. So we're going to move on to the state house districts. And again, for everybody that's joining us, when we are looking at this as staff, from the chamber, working with our Capitol Caucus members. This is where, and again, for everybody on here, we will be sending this out to all the attendees. But you can see that we were looking at some areas where I don't think Zach's going to talk about, but in Livingston, Washtenaw, Jackson County, Calhoun, continuing to look at what this Capitol Caucus, the membership of it may look like moving forward. But with that, Zach, please run through the new state house districts.
So big changes here. Ingham has always sort of been 3 districts. I know for recent years has been 3 districts, one with most of Lansing, one with South Lansing. Let me say this: one with most of Lansing, one with East Lansing, Meridian, and going east, and then something with South Lansing, the rest of the county. But that's all changed this time around. You can see, I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4 different districts with Ingham County pieces. I'm going to start with, let's start with District 73. It's most of Ingham County, at least from a square mileage standpoint. And I think it's pretty interesting what's going on there. So this is where Representative Julie Brixey is going to be running for re-election, and talk about a sea change in her district. So I mentioned the district before that was East Lansing, Meridian Township, Williamstown Township, Williamston Lock. That's her current district. It's been carved up, blown up. And now Representative Brixey is looking at a district that looks a lot more like current State Representative Kara Hope's district, in that it's got the rural areas of Ingham County. It's got Mason. It's got, Fansville, these areas. So what's changed for her is she lost all of East Lansing and Meridian Township that's north of Grand River Avenue. And if you know anything about the politics of this area, that area is a solidly Democratic area. She had an overwhelmingly Democratic district, and that is just not the case anymore. This is what I would describe now as a tilting Democratic district. From what I've seen from some of the emails she's put out, I think she says no incumbent Democratic member of the House lost more of their Democratic base than she did. And I think it's clear she's already campaigning like, I've got a real fight on my hands in November. What would worry me if I were her and her team is the Democratic base of this district now is very reliant on the MSU campus. To the extent that the students register to vote in their dorms and vote in their dorms and are living in their dorms, which of course in 2020 wasn't necessarily the case. I think that will be more so the case in 2022. But a lot of students decide to register. They're going to register at their parents' house and don't vote in their dorms. So I think it adds a lot of volatility there for Representative Brixey. She only keeps the barest amount of East Lansing that's not the campus. She still has Meridian south of Grand River Avenue, but that's not necessarily, there's some Republican areas in there that she loses a lot of her base and picks up a lot of new turf, and a lot of new turf that's very Republican. So the key for the Republicans here was they needed to get somebody who was a decent, could be a decent candidate and knows how to run a campaign. And they got one in Norm Schinkel, who's been around for a long time as a Republican operative. He's run Republican campaigns, and he's going to be a formidable person for Representative Brixey to deal with. This is a new world for her. But when she first got elected, the key was winning the Democratic primary. Once she got through the primary, it was a layup to win the general election. This time around, especially if this ends up being a good Republican year, she's gonna have to really fight tooth and nail. I think she is the favorite, but it's gonna be a battle for her. What's interesting is, Norm Schinkel is on what's called the Board of State Canvassers. They're the folks who certify election results, among other things. And he was the only member who did not vote to certify the 2020 election. He abstained as kind of a nod to Republican claims about fraud in the election. And so we've already seen Representative Brixey making a big point of this, that he was kind of out there on the fringe of things. And so that is something he's going to have to answer for and deal with. But I expect this to be a pretty aggressive campaign all the way around. If you're the Republicans and you're looking at Representative Brixey, you've got somebody who has voted as though, with a solidly Democratic district. So there's probably some votes in there they feel like they can exploit and say, hey, this doesn't fit Southern Ingham County. So I expect a really interesting race there in the general election. Let's just stick with kind of that East Lansing Meridian area, since that's what we're talking about. So you have the remnants of the old Brixey district, East Lansing and Meridian north of Grand River, now attached to southeast Clinton and southwest Shiawassee counties. This is still a pretty solidly Democratic district because you've got the base of the population is East Lansing and Meridian. You also have Bath over there, which has become kind of a Democratic leaning community. And there's just not enough rural area and rural voters in the Clinton and Shiawassee components to overcome that. So it's going to come down to the Democratic primary. It was really interesting to watch this one develop because everyone was kind of holding their breath to see if Senator Hertel was going to run because he lives in this district, and no one was everyone was waiting to see what would happen there before announcing. He decided not to run. Within probably seconds of that announcement, we started getting announcements from others. And so we've got 3 Democrats here where the primary is going to be decisive. Ingham County Commissioner Emily Stivers, Don Keski, who I believe runs a public law practice, and Penelope Cerniglu, who runs and owns Practical Political Consulting, ran for against Julie Brixey 4 years ago in what's, that district I just talked about, East Lansing, Meridian, Williamstown, Williamston, et cetera, and lost a very aggressively hard fought race to her. She's back. And already we're seeing, this is going to be a really active campaign. I've already gotten 2 mail pieces. As Steve mentioned, I live in this part of East Lansing, from Penelope Cerniglu, 4-color glossy, and it's April. So I feel like she's thinking like, I'm winning it this time. I'm not leaving anything to chance. And she's really after it. We had a handbill on our door over the weekend. So someone was doing door-to-door work for Penelope Cerniglu. So she's already out there firing on all cylinders. And I think, has some advantages having run in this area before. She knows the mechanics of campaigns. Yes, Emily Stivers is on the Ingham County Board of Commissioners, so she has run and won the campaign. But the Ingham County Board is a little more anonymous. Makes it a little more, you're not as well known as say if you were on the East Lansing Council. So that'll be a little bit challenging for her, but I expect a good race here. I think it'll be interesting to see who can mine some votes out of the new areas in Clinton and Shiawassee. Again, not a lot of Democratic voters there, but I do think Bath is going to be really important to this race. So should be a heck of a race. I would expect if you live in East Lansing, Meridian, or Bath, your mailboxes are going to be full of political mail this time around. So going to be an interesting one there. I'll take a breather here, see if Steve, if you want to jump in with anything, or if anyone else wants to jump in with anything.
Yeah, no, that's it is. I'm receiving a lot of the same emails. Of course, I live in the 77th district, and I know we're going to touch base on that. But yeah, it's obviously going to be very active. A lot, I guess, from your point of view, and I know we're going to talk about the 76th district, but quite a few of these are going to be decided in the primary. A lot of the ones that we're discussing right now. Correct.
Yeah. If I just glancing at sort of the immediate capital region seats, I mean, you've really only got, as I look at and I'm not going to count the Jackson area and Battle Creek areas, but if you look, Ingham, Livingston, Eaton, and going north from there, there's really only 2 seats where the general election, I think, comes into play. You mentioned 76, and then we talked about the Brixey Shinkle race. Everything else is the primary. So since you mentioned you live in District 77, let's go there next. So really interesting. Again, the commission split the city of, Lansing had to be split. It's got too many people for a single state house race, but it split it more evenly in the past. It didn't say, we're going to have one district that's just all Lansing, and then the rest of Lansing gets attached somewhere else. They kind of split it roughly in half this time. North Lansing gets joined to Southwest Clinton County and Grand Ledge in Eaton. This is a solidly Democratic district. This is where State Representative Graham Filler lived, would have been the district where you would need to run, but there was no way he could, being a Republican, no way he could win that. So he moved, I believe, to St. John's. He's in that 93rd district now and is the heavy favorite to win that 93rd district to the north. Really interesting primary in the 77th district. You've got a newcomer to politics in John Horford, very well-known name locally, kind of basketball playing family. Horfords. John played college basketball and some professional basketball. His brother Al played college basketball and is still playing in the NBA. So, well-known name locally on the sports scene, and has gotten involved in business in the community, and has decided to run for state house. He's got involved in the Michigan political leadership program, saw him at the dinner there the other night. So he's, clearly, I don't know if he's been interested in politics for a long time, and now he's decided it's time to begin that phase of his life, or if he just caught the bug and decided to go for it. But interesting candidate there. And then probably the other well-known locally candidate is Emily Devendorf. Emily was an aide in the legislature for much of the 2000s, and then was the executive director of Equality Michigan, which is sort of the leading LGBTQ organization in the state for a number of years, and now does consulting. So she knows the drill when it comes to campaigns and campaigning. And what I think, I don't want to give Logan Byrne short shrift here. He's the third Democrat in the race. I think he's probably a long shot to win this, but I know he's been in touch with us to let us know he's out there and he's running. So, I don't want to, totally overlook him. It's a kind of district where shoe leather makes a difference. If he gets out there and works hard, he could become a factor. But I think by and large, this is Devendorf and Horford, and the endorsements already on this are fascinating. Mayor Shore is with Horford. Ingham County Clerk Barb Byram is with Emily Devendorf, and both are announcing, competing slate of endorsements. Now, endorsements aren't the end all be all, but it is interesting to watch, people choosing up sides. And I think that's going to continue. I thought it was kind of interesting. If I remember, Devendorf and Cernoglu endorsed each other. Don't know what difference that really makes since they're in different districts, but again, sort of a progressive alliance. I think you're going to see, that kind of more of the progressive. If you think about, Democrats in Michigan, like Rashida Tlaib, Congresswoman from the Detroit area. You think about Bernie Sanders, that's more the mode that Devendorf and Cernoglu are. That's the MO they're adopting. We'll find out as we interview these candidates. I suspect philosophically there's not a lot of daylight between Emily Devendorf and John Horford. We'll find out, but it should be a really interesting Democratic primary. Not only do you have North Lansing, but DeWitt Township, those have gone for, that used to be, when I first started covering things 20 years ago, those were strongly Republican areas, but those are now slightly Democratic areas. You've had a combination of outmigration from Lansing moving north, combined with just the general shift nationally in suburban areas becoming more Democratic. And then Grand Ledge, kind of the same story. It used to be a Republican area, now tilting Democratic. So a lot of interesting pockets of votes to mine there, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. You want me to move on to 76, Steve?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. This is really I would say the showcase race when it comes to the November general election. This is where Representative Angela Whitwer is going to be running for re-election, and she's looking at her third cycle in a row of an all-out battle for the November election. She won this as an open seat in 2018 over a person we're going to talk about later, Christine Barnes. That was a dogfight, tons of money spent, relatively close race. And then she won again in 2020 in a much tougher environment, but was able to beat Gina Johnson, another person we'll talk about in a little bit. That was one where, I think if the Republicans had to do it over again, they wish they would have had a better candidate and invested more earlier in it, because I think Whitwer, it just looked like she was going to roll to an easy reelection. She was raising tons of money. She had all the business group endorsements that a Republican generally needs to have a chance. And it just looked like Gina Johnson, the Republican, there was no oxygen for her there. But President Trump brought out a ton of voters in Eaton County, and it was close. A lot closer than people expected. Had there been a more credible Republican effort, Representative Whitwer might have been defeated. So I think everybody is paying attention. Republicans have a strong candidate this time. Eaton County Commissioner where's his name here? I lost track of it. Jeremy Whittam. I'm sorry. Jeremy Whittam is going to be the candidate there. And I expect this to be a barn burner all the way through. One thing I think, in general, from redistricting, altered the district slightly. The one thing I would be a little concerned for, if your Whitwer is she lost Grant Ledge, or at least a big chunk of it. That was some Democratic votes there that she lost. But if you're Whittam, that northwest section of Eaton and that little piece south of there that got moved into 78, those are like hardcore Trump areas, like 80, where Trump won like 80% of the vote. So I'm going to guess redistricting was mostly a wash. And we'll find out. I think that one's going to go down to the wire.
Yeah, and how much do you think? So we kind of go back and we go back to the congressional district and talking about some of these state issues. Again, I'm going back to the economic development incentive package. Out of that came the new electric vehicle plan. Obviously, Representative Whitwer was very supportive of that, as well as Eaton County Board Chair Whittam. Obviously, two different. A Republican that was supportive. So if we think of State Senator Tom Barrett, that was a no, but County Commissioner Whittam was a yes. I mean, how much is, at the end of the day, the national type of all the issues going on there at the national, is that vote going to matter, locally for this type of race? If we dial it down into those types of, the one issue, big issue.
Well, I mean, the fact that they both supported it, I don't see that. It's hard for me to envision how that ends up becoming a major factor in this race. If there's not, no difference between the two of them on it, they can both say, hey, we supported it. We took actions to help make it happen. Moving on to the other, I don't know what, they can both emphasize it as something to play up, to voters and vote, that at least, if that's an important item for a voter, it checks that box. So, if you're Jeremy Whittam and you're trying to make inroads in some of the more middle of the road areas of the district, and you can say, hey, I was in favor of this, you don't run the risk of losing those voters. So I don't see it being a big deal. And everything flows downward from the top of the ticket. The number one and number two factors really to watch here are going to be, what's the national climate and how does Governor Whitmer do in this district? Governor Whitmer crushed it in Eaton County. I mean, crushed it 4 years ago. I think she won it by 9 or 10 points. That's way better than your standard garden variety Democrat would do. Of course, she was really well known. having been a state rep and state senator from the area for a long time. And you've got a lot of state employees over there who know her and respect her as well. So can Governor Whitmer engineer a repeat in Eaton County of that? Probably not, because it's just not going to be as favorable an environment for Democrats this time around. But she needs to win Eaton. The governor needs to win Eaton County. If the governor doesn't win Eaton County, it's hard for me to see how Representative Whitwer can hang on. So that's big, and if it ends up being a monster year nationally for the Republicans, where their candidate for governor ties or comes within a point or two, or even wins Eaton County, then Jeremy Whittam's probably going to win. As it's very, it's very difficult to swim upstream. Representative Whitwer is doing all the things as an incumbent you would want to do, making the rounds, schools, coffees, working with her constituency groups, working with her chambers of commerce. But it's really difficult to swim upstream when you're down at the state rep level. It's a little different, if you're, running for Congress, you're still pretty closely tied to what happens nationally, but you're better known. You can, look at Alyssa Slotkin was able to overcome Trump carrying her district 2 years ago based on her own strength. That's where the candidate to candidate differences matter. It gets tougher the farther down the ticket you get.
Oh, thank you for that. So a couple more here. If you want to kind of walk through, and it's probably difficult for us and probably other groups that engage in endorsements and whatnot, is there's a lot of different friends on both sides of the aisle that may be running against each other now, but we've endorsed a lot of these folks in past elections as well. But kind of going through the 78, that 43rd, again, we look at the redistricting commission and how they just cut up some of these counties, especially if you look at 78 and 43 on how many different
Right.
areas that they cover. But kind of walk through a little bit of those. And then
Sure. So 78
you.
is really interesting. You can see it's, bulk of the population is Northeast Berry and most of Ionia counties. You've got a little bit of Eaton, teeny bit of Kent. This would be the incumbent rep here would be Julie Calley, but she's term limited. So you've got a lot of interesting things going on in the Republican primary. 4 candidates. You've got Ben Geiger, Berry County commissioner, and I think would sort of be seen as your traditional style Republican candidate, local elected official, well-known, worked for former Lieutenant Governor Calley, kind of coming up through the ranks, building to this moment to run for the legislature. I mentioned Christine Barnes earlier. She was the state rep candidate in what is now the 76th district, but she lives in Eaton County, so she's now in 78. I think she's out in the Sunfield area. So she's over there. You got Gina Johnson, who I mentioned earlier, is going to be running in that. She lost in 2020, running in this district. And then you got John Rocha, newcomer, but has former President Trump's endorsement, was a huge advocate for the whole election was stolen argument. And that's why he's got Trump's endorsement. And he's, I believe, in Berry County, if I recall. So this is a mess of a primary, and an important test case for what is the importance or strength of a Trump endorsement. Barnes and Johnson both won to get, I mentioned they lost in 2018 and 2020 respectively, but they had to win Republican primaries to get to the general election. And if I recall correctly, both of those were fairly involved. They weren't cakewalks. So they both know the drill. And Gina Johnson, as I mentioned, did much better than people expected against Angela Whitwer 2 years ago. So I don't think she can be taken for granted. She was very active in the stop the lockdowns kinds of protests that occurred in 2020. Barnes, I think, a little more challenging. She's had some, personal financial issues in the past with a bankruptcy, if I remember, that hurt her in her state rep campaign 4 years ago. But she's back. Like I said, she won a tough Republican primary 4 years ago and can't be ignored. I have no idea who's coming out of this primary. As I mentioned, really important test case. Is a Trump endorsement all it takes to win? Because I don't think there's a lot of daylight between Barnes, Johnson, and Rocha philosophically. I think one thing that'll be interesting is, Ben Geiger, certainly conservative guy down the line. He tried to, back up in some ways the Barry Eaton health director, who was taking enormous heat over restrictions during the pandemic. And he made it clear he disagreed with the restrictions. He wouldn't have supported them, but he also made it clear he wasn't going to, try to engineer the firing of the health officer over them. He felt like, look, we hired this person to do a job. We're going to let them do the job. And he took a lot of heat for that too. So that's going to be interesting too, to see, does that factor in at all? And then you wanted me to talk about 43.
Yeah, a little bit of 43, and then
Yeah, so kind of on the outskirts of the region, certainly a really unusual district. I mean, who would have thought Southwest Eaton and Southeast Ottawa would be joined into a district? This is like 78, solidly Republican district here. There is no incumbent who lives in this district right now because of the way the districts were drawn. If you had to look at where the population of it is, the bulk of it would be in this Allegan portion. This is another one where the Trump endorsement is going to be closely watched. So Rochelle Smith is the Trump endorsed candidate here. Don't know a lot about her besides that. I think on paper, this most interesting candidate besides her is Lindsay Kronemeyer. She works in insurance and has a military background and is out there campaigning very actively. So to me, it's sort of, you're going to have, Rochelle Smith. It's got the Trump world behind her. If I had to guess, Lindsay Kronemeyer is probably going to have a lot of your more traditional Republican primary players getting behind her. And that's going to be, to me, this is definitely one of the ones got really important test case on the Trump endorsement significance. So.
yeah, and for everybody on here, that little slither of the 43 in Eaton County, I believe that's Bellevue. I'm not sure what township, but that's the Bellevue location. So 93rd, and then just 71. I think you've already kind of discussed.
So as I mentioned, Representative Filler moved north. He does have a primary, but Alan Hoover, who I believe is the candidate up there, kind of a perennial candidate. I'd be surprised if that represents any kind of a real threat. But Representative Filler can't take it for granted. He gave up probably the population base of his district down in the DeWitt Bath area and moved north and east. I mean, this is a much more conservative district than what he had in the past. I mean, Western Saginaw County, Northern Clinton, Southern Gratiot, Northeast Ionia, and Eastern Montcalm. These are hardcore Trump Republican areas. And I think most people would say, Representative Filler is a pretty, center-right Republican. So I don't think Alan Hoover is a threat to him, but I would suspect, this being the last, unless term limits changes, of course, there's a ballot proposal to change it, but if term limits doesn't change, Filler can't seek re-election in 2024. Whoever replaces him is probably going to be more conservative than he is, and may not be from, it may be someone from Saginaw County, not from Clinton. So we'll just have to see on that. District 71, another Trump world, where this is going to be important. So the name candidate is Shiawassee County Sheriff Brian Begole. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. My apologies if I butchered it. So you look at on paper, you'd say sitting county sheriff, heavy favorite, where this is a district where Shiawassee County anchors the seat in population. But this is, Representative Frederick is term limited, can't seek reelection. But Kevin Rathbun is, I believe, endorsed by former President Trump. And we're going to see how much of a factor that is. Now, he's kind of recently moved back to the area. So, again, how far does a Trump endorsement carry you? This will be a really telling sign. If somebody who has recently moved to the area can beat a sitting county sheriff on the strength of a Trump endorsement and whatever shoe leather they put into the campaign, that's going to be pretty telling. Don't want to overlook the other candidates. Bob Carlin, I believe, is a farmer. And this is a district where agriculture is huge. So, the Michigan Farm Bureau is often an important player in a Republican primary, and they tend to support their own if a farmer is in the race. So, I don't want to make a prediction there, but if you have a Farm Bureau endorsement in a Republican primary, that makes you, that shows you've got some real credibility there. I don't know a lot about Ali Williston. Was a late filer at the campaign.
Good, thank you. So good question. How does a state house candidate, or probably any of the candidates, get a Trump endorsement? Is this all run by existing House majority, or is there an individual lobbying done by these candidates to
That's a great
receive the
question.
former president's endorsement? Yeah.
So I don't know to what extent, probably not very much. Our audience is familiar with Michonne Maddock. She is the co-chair of the Michigan Republican Party, and really, in many ways, the face of the Trump movement in the state of Michigan. She lives in Oakland County, so probably not someone people around here are very familiar with at all. She is the person who's helping engineer a Trump endorsement. If you want a Trump endorsement, you pretty much need to break bread with Michonne Maddock, and whatever litmus test they have to get that endorsement, you're going to have to pass muster with her. I believe she's the conduit between candidates here in Michigan and the Trump world. And so that's how you get it. This is much to the consternation. Your question here mentioned, is it the caucus that's involved with this? No. And much to their consternation. Some of these endorsements have gone for candidates who are running against incumbent Senate Republicans or incumbent House Republicans. And the Speaker of the House, Jason Wentworth, the Majority Leader in the Senate, Mike Shirkey, both Republicans, of course, very unhappy about this. And they're worried about, if these people come up, get elected in the open seats, like we mentioned, and their sole cause is stop fraud in elections. And, I think there's a lot of concern about, is this someone we could work with on any issues? Or are they just going to be throwing bombs up here, causing trouble, creating problems, people we can't work with, and just aren't familiar and don't care about other issues. So I'm very interested to see what the groups that traditionally play in Republican primaries, what they're going to do, because I think we saw in the special elections that took place for some state house seats in March primaries, if they don't get involved on behalf of another candidate, some of these candidates could come through. We had that happen in a state house seat in Kent County. Was not a Trump endorsed person, but certainly someone whose worldview is similar, ended up winning. And it's really scared the heck out of people around town that this person could be, this could be the beginning, the tip of the iceberg of what's to come this year.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do scratch my head on some of the endorsements as well, and how those happen and occur. But so when we're looking at the state house right now, Republicans hold the majority. Again, we don't have the Upper Peninsula on this screen, so apologize anybody that is from the UP. But what is the likelihood? What's it look like? I mean, I know you went through that the national climate, the governor, how she does, but, what does this look like for the state House? Republicans, are they retain, or the Democrats get an opportunity here?
Well, there's a reason that the Republicans really didn't bring serious litigation against the maps. And I think it's because I think they felt like they made out okay. It could have gone a lot worse for them. And I think that's really true in the state house. I mentioned before how the Senate was really level when you looked at solid seats for each side, likely seats for each side, tilting seats, and toss up. That was almost an even pyramid. It's not quite so even in the House. If you look at these seats, we've got about 45 we consider solid or likely Republican, and 35 solid or likely Democratic. You need 56 for majority. So the math is really simple. The Republicans, of those remaining 30 seats we consider competitive to some degree, the Republicans only need to win 11. The Democrats need to win like 20. So right there, you'd much rather be in the Republican shoes than the Democrat shoes. And you could hear too that, like, whereas the Senate Democrats were like euphoric about how the maps were drawn for them, very quiet among the House Democrats. They didn't say a whole heck of a lot about how happy they were with these maps. And they've got some defense to play. Like I said, Angela Whitwer is not a lock to be reelected. You can see District 44 there on your map, which is kind of Battle Creek and Albion. There's a Democratic incumbent there. He's got a huge fight on his hands. He only won by 1 percentage point 2 years ago. He may not get reelected. Now, the commission did try to carve out some new seats. I mentioned, you look there, District 46 on this map. That's a new district that kind of tries to return a competitive seat to the Jackson area. Jackson used to always have a competitive seat or two between the maps being drawn they were, and shifts in party leanings. That hasn't been the case for over a decade, but that District 46, that's going to be a pretty competitive seat to watch. District 48 there on your map too, also a competitive seat. So there's a ton more competitive districts. Like I said, we've got 30 right now that look competitive. That'll narrow as time goes on and we learn more about these candidates, and who's for real and who's not. So I think if you were asking, is this map better for Democrats than the current map? You would say yes, absolutely. But the challenge for the commission, because things are so geographically polarized, where Michigan's rural areas are just so Republican now, and the Democrats are in such closely condensed, heavily populated pockets, it's much harder to create a competitive seat in the House than it is in the Senate. So if you think about each House seat is about 90,000 voters. If you're looking at an area where there's a pocket of votes, it's much harder to split that out. I don't know if I'm explaining this well. Whereas with a Senate seat is 270,000 votes, you can mix and match different pieces much more easily to create a competitive seat. So I think on balance, I'd much rather be in the Republican shoes than the Democrats. If Governor Whitmer has a really good year, she wins 4, 5, 6, 7 points or something like that, the Democrats have a credible shot to take the House. But absent that, I don't see it happening. I think it's just going to be really tough for them to get the seats they need. I mean, it could end up being sort of where it is now, 58, 52, or at least that's how it was at the start of the term.
So just to kind of follow up, and I think you answered it, but just kind of, what are Governor Whitmer's numbers right now, and is she a lock?
I think in general, they're not good, not great. I guess they're good, not great is what I would say. The good news for her is, I think pretty much every survey I've seen that asks on job approval is she's above water, which means more people approve of her job performance than disapprove. And the same surveys show President Biden underwater, more disapproving than approving. So I think we can take a couple of things from that. One is, we know the poll isn't skewed because people are saying, I'm unhappy with the president, but I'm okay with the governor. We know that it's not like a Republican heavy poll or a Democratic heavy poll. So I think we can give it some credibility. from that standpoint. But we can also say the governor is below, is hovering around 45% in her approval rating, which isn't great. The old standard used to be if it was incumbent, you wanted to be at 50% or better. Today's day and age, that's a lot to ask. It's hard to, people are generally unhappy with elected officials. So in my mind, it's, you want to see, if an incumbent's in the upper 40s, that's pretty good. She's not there. She's in the mid 40s, which isn't great, but she, at least is not underwater. And right now the Republicans don't, they haven't invested in any kind of a big moneyed campaign to drive her negatives up. If you had had a really well-financed Republican candidate that cleared the field, I think we might have seen a national Republican effort to come in and with a bunch of ads and try to drive up her negatives early. It hasn't happened. Instead, you've got this huge 10 candidate field, none of whom I would describe as like an A-list type candidate. Doesn't mean that none of them can win, but it also means this is going to be really clouded and we're not going to know who the nominee is going to be for quite some time. And it also means that the Republican money is not going to legitimately pour into this race in a meaningful way, probably until the late summer. I think if you're Governor Whitmer's people right now, you probably feel okay. It could be a lot worse. The national environment for Democrats is so bad. If there was, if Candace Miller, the former Secretary of State and member of Congress and Macomb County Public Works Commissioner, if she had run and cleared the field, I think they would be maybe terrified right now about Governor Whitmer losing, but that's not the case. They've got this cluster of a field, 10 candidates on the Republican side, none of whom look particularly strong. And they've managed to keep her numbers above water, even as the president's are poor. I think you feel right now, boy, things could be a lot worse. I think you feel okay if you're her right now, but they know they are in the thick of this. This is not 2018. This is not going to be, after the primary. I don't want to say it was a cakewalk because these elections are such hard work, but they were never the outcome was never really in doubt after the primary in 2018. It was clear Governor Whitmer was well ahead of Bill Schuette, the Attorney General at the time, and that never changed. This is not going to be like that. This is going to be, they're going to be running scared all the way through, I think.
No, that's really helpful because it's probably tough for a lot of us that are on this call that might be viewing this at a later time, but when you get kind of stuck in the Capitol bubble here a little bit, and not that we don't go talk to other folks and communicate throughout the state, but I think that was helpful to kind of walk through that. I feel the same way with the governor right now. I think they're probably happy there's 10 different candidates on the Republican side. But again, it's really just fascinating looking at what's happening on the national side. And I haven't looked at the other states. The U.S. Senate, obviously the U.S. House, but the U.S. Senate, there's other states. We're not up this year, but obviously they're going to be spending a lot more time in some of those states where they're going to try to flip the Senate as well. But no, thank you, Zach. I know we're right on the 10:30.
All right.
So Zach, that was very well done. And I want to thank everybody for joining us live, and then those that'll be reviewing this at a later date. But thank you, Zach, for your time, for your expertise going through this. I think this is your third or fourth time, but man, it continues now that we have the candidates kind of lined up here and kind of get a lay of the land. But thank you for going through all three, the Congressional, State Senate, State House. Really appreciate your time and again, your expertise.
Yeah, happy to do it. And thanks a lot for having me.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.